This is day 1 of Unit 4, Part 2. We're going to do 11.1. So the circumference is the perimeter of a circle, and we could either use the radius or the diameter to calculate the circumference. So circumference would either be 2 pi times the radius or pi times the diameter. And remember, that's because 2 times the radius is the diameter. So for example, when it says find the exact, so when we use the word exact circumference, we mean that we're not going to get rid of the pi, because pi is an irrational number. That means you have to approximate it when you turn it into the decimal form, but we want the exact answer, meaning we want it in terms of pi. So that means if the radius is 29, we would use the formula with radius. I'd plug in 29 for r, and I'm not going to touch the pi. I'm just going to multiply the 2 by the 29 and attach the pi to it. So the circumference would be 58 pi, and then the units for circumference, because it's just a length, are meters. Right? They're not squared, they're not cubed or anything like that. That's what we mean by that. So you can go ahead and do try 1, pause. The answers are posted in the blank notes. For example 2, now we're going to work backwards. It says find the radius of a circle whose circumference is given. So in the first one, it's 121.27. So since we're looking for radius, I'll use the 2 pi r version of the formula, and we're going to set it equal to what is the circumference. So I need to divide by 2 pi. If you're not going to use parentheses, I would do it in 2 steps, because otherwise it thinks you're dividing by 2 and then multiplying your result by pi. So your choices would be to divide by 2 pi inside parentheses, or divide by 2, then divide by pi. So as long as you do one of those 2 ways, we should get 19.3 as our radius. And because this is also a length, it would remain feet as my units. All right, so for B, my circumference is 18 pi. So that's 18 pi equals 2 pi r. So here, the pi's cancel. When we divide by pi, it's gone. So I'm really just going to have to divide by 2. So 9 would be my answer. It's 9 yards would be the radius. So there's 2 here for you. One asks for the diameter, one asks for the radius. You can pause. The answers are posted in the blank notes. If we can have a circumference, we can also find out the actual length of an arc, because it's a portion of the circumference. So the arc length is the distance between the endpoints along an arc measure. It is a portion of the circumference, and we find it using a proportion. So the number of degrees of that arc over 360, so that's how much of the circle out of the whole circle, equals the length of the arc over the circumference. So again, a portion of the circle out of the whole circle. We can solve for any missing piece within this, though. They could ask us for the measure, the number of degrees. It could ask us for the arc length. It could ask us for the whole circumference. It could ask us for the radius. It could ask us for the diameter. So the variable can be anywhere within this proportion. So for example 3, it says find the length of arc zy. So that means in our proportion, the missing piece is the length. So the degrees over 360, arc zy was 130 degrees, so we'll do 130 over 360 equals x over, and down here is the circumference. Depending on what I'm given, will determine which part of that formula I use. 10 is the diameter, so we're going to use pi d. That's pi times 10. This is now just cross multiplying, so we get 360x equals 130 times 10 times pi, so that's 1300 pi. I'm going to keep it like this for right now, just to show you the difference again between an exact and an approximate answer. So if I didn't touch the pi and I divided by 360, I'm really just reducing my fraction of 1300 over 360. So that'd be 65 over 18. So this answer would be 65 pi over 18 centimeters. That would be exact. If I wanted approximate, it's fine to turn 1300 times pi into something. Every calculator has a pi button, which we should be using to get the most precise answer. So doing 1300 times pi would have turned this into 360x equals 4084.07, and then dividing by 360 would give me 11.34 centimeters as my arc length. So that's an approximate answer. Okay, so sometimes it might ask for exact, sometimes it might ask for approximate. If it doesn't specify, approximate is fine. So here's one for you to try. You can pause. The answers are posted in the blank notes. For example 4, we want to find the length of the radius. So in our formula, the 2 pi r, I'm going to put 2 pi r on the bottom there because r is what I'm looking for. So that means I do know the number of degrees of the arc, which this arc is what's being given to us. So 290. And this 46.75 feet is the length. That's why it's on the outside here. So that's going to go up here in the length spot. So again, we're going to cross multiply. I'm just going to right now do 290 times 2 times pi, 580 pi r, and then I'll turn that into my decimal in a second. And 360 times 46.75 gives me 16,830. All right, so if I have my 580 pi, that's really 1822.12. But I'm going to use that whole number in my calculator to divide. So I'm going to hit 16,830 divided by my answer, and I get 9.24. My units were feet, so feet. Here's one for you to try. You can pause. Answers are posted in the blank notes. Example 5 says find the measure of arc RS. So the measure indicates the degrees. So the degrees spot of my fraction will be my variable. I have my length of arc RS out here is 44 meters. And I'm given the radius. They pointed to just this line. That is the radius. So I'm going to use 2 pi r. So this time I'm just going to multiply this all at once. 2 times pi times 15.28 times x gives me about 96.0x. So I'm going to write 96x equals 360 times 44, 15,840. And then dividing by that 96 gives me about 165 degrees. Right? So this is in degrees now because we were talking about the measure. It wouldn't be in terms of meters. So here's one for you to try. You can pause. Answers are posted on the blank notes. So example 6 just says solve for the variables. So we know we could solve for x because that's an angle, and that angle is the remaining angle, knowing the rest of the circle was 225. So we know that everything together would equal 360. So adding those two angles up would equal 360. So that's going to give me 2x plus 240. So that 2x is 120, and x is 60. And then for y, this is an arc length. They're saying y minus 3 times pi is the arc length. We also know the radius, and we know the degrees, right? If this was 125, 225, this was 135, which also we could have just said 2x plus 15 equals 135, and that would have worked as well. So to find my y value, we're going to do degrees over 360 equals the length over the circumference, and if I know the radius, that's going to be 2 pi times the radius. What's really nice here is these pi's will cancel. So now I'm just cross multiplying this. I'm going to have 360 times the y minus 3 equals the 135 times the 8. So this is going to be 360y minus 1080 equals 1080. So when I add 1080 to both sides, I get 2160. And then dividing by 360, we get y equals 6. So there's one here for you to try. You can pause. Answers are posted in the blank notes. All right, example 7 is asking to find the perimeter of the figure, and the figure is a lot of weird shapes. But the weird shapes are all things we know how to do, right? Here is a quarter of a circle. Here is a quarter of a circle. I know it's a quarter because it was 90 degrees, right? And 90 is 1/4 of 360. Here's a quarter of a circle. Here's a quarter of a circle. If I have 4 quarters of a circle, that's one whole circle. So far my perimeter is going to be one whole circle plus this measurement and this measurement. So 6 plus 6 plus this measurement plus this measurement, 2 plus 2. So the only thing I really have to find is the circumference of that single circle. If the entire height was 6 and this piece was 2, that means 4 is left over for both of those. That means each of these has a radius of 2. So my circle is going to be 2 pi r plus, that's 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So again, an exact answer would have been 4 pi plus 16. And that's perfectly fine to leave your answer like that if you wanted it to be exact. And if I wanted to turn this into a decimal, it would be 28.57. All right, there's one here for you to try. And pause. Answer posted in the blank notes. And for our last problem, we want to calculate the length of the go-kart track. They're saying that turns 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9 each have a radius of 3 meters, and turns 3 and 7 each have a radius of 2.25 meters. How many laps do you need to make to travel 1,609 meters? That's about a mile. So we're going to find the full perimeter of this shape. So we know for 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 6, half a circle, 5, a quarter, 4, a quarter. So far we have a half plus a quarter plus a quarter. So that's one whole. Then we have 2, 1, 9, and 8. Those were all quarters as well. So that's 4 quarters again. So that's another whole circle. And then 3 and 7 each have a different radius, but each one is also half of a circle. So for the other radius, we have a half and a half. So we have one whole circle there. So that means I have to find 2 circumferences of a circle that has a radius of 3 and 1 circumference for a circle that has a radius of 2.25. So for the radius of 2.25, that's pi up 2 pi times 2.25. So that would be 4.5 pi. And if you're going to do multiple things with pi in the same problem, I would keep pi until the very end, until you only have 1 pi left in the problem. All right, then we said we're going to do 2 circles, and each one was 2 pi times 3. So that's 6 pi times 2, that's 12 pi. So we have a total circular perimeter of 16.5 pi. And then we have to add on our straight shots, right? We have a 20, a 30, an 8, a 12, and a 30. So 16.5 pi plus the 20, the 30, the 8, the 12, and the 30. Let's just make sure those are all correct. 20, 30, 8, 12, 30. Oh, I missed a 6 and a 6. So adding this all up will give me my total perimeter. 20 plus 30 plus 8. Oops, the wrong things. 8 plus 12 plus 30 plus 6 plus 6. So each lap is about 163.84 meters. If we want to travel 1,609 meters, I can divide 1609 by my answer. So it takes 9.82 laps. So I'm going to say we'll have to travel the full 10 laps if we want to at least hit that, because we're not going to stop in that lap there, unless you crash. I guess you can. So that is the end of 11.1. Have a great day.